Good evening, Grand Strategists. Welcome back to the War Table. This is Genesis here. I'm bringing you an episode on a deep dive into the economy of EU5. I hope everyone had a great holiday during the season. In this video, we're going to go over the different strategies and styles for producing income, how to manage expenses, and how to affect these things with different modifiers to your benefit. I want to give a huge shout out to everyone who has been subscribing and watching my guides so far. You are greatly appreciated. I am trying to reach my first 100 subscribers, so if you think you would enjoy watching more content around 4X games or Paradox games, please subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. Alright, let's dive in. Okay, so we're going to go over the basic two types of economies that you can have in a 4X or grand strategy game. You've probably heard these concepts before. So tall versus wide, if you've heard of these before and you don't really want to listen to them, go ahead, skip ahead. If you have not, or if you want to understand the context at which they apply in EU, go ahead and listen. Tall economies will focus on having low locations typically. They will usually focus on improving those locations to essentially specialize them and to increase them dramatically through different efficiency bonuses. They'll usually have high control over the nation itself. This will help maximize the taxation that it gets out of the country or the locations. And one thing you will see is that because they are a small location country, they'll have high satisfaction because they'll usually be the same culture, same religion. You won't have to deal with any of the friction between population that sometimes wider economies or wider nations may have to deal with. You can focus on trade in order to maximize your income as a smaller nation. If you just don't have because eventually what's going to happen is you're going to run out of buildings that you can build inside a location. So if you only have 5 or 6 locations, if my building limit is 177, well, I can only build 177 buildings, and then I start going over that and having penalties. So over the building limit, you can go over it. Let me see if I have an example. Yeah, so new building cost and then migration attraction. People may start leaving essentially if you go negative. So that's something to keep in mind. They can be weak without mercenaries or having regulars. So you may struggle early on as a smaller nation. If you look, I'm playing a later game right now, and you can see some of these smaller nations get eaten up. Especially by the bigger nations. So you have to play a more diplomatic game. You have to figure out and plan for that, especially in this update. Like the current 1.01 update, the AI is super aggressive. The big countries will typically try to eat you. So if you do not make any of them your friend to help defend you against the other ones, someone is going to try to pick you apart. A valid strategy is definitely playing tall and then scaling into a wide-ish economy. You don't necessarily have to be tall, but you need to be able to scale your military as well to keep up with France, Bohemia, Hungary, Castile, England, some of the big major countries in the EU. And then out west or out east, you have, Great Wu and the hordes and stuff like that you might have to deal with. So you got to keep that in mind if you're going tall, for example. I do like one of the biggest advantages that tall may have is that their tech, just the rate at which they get institution spread is absurd. It spreads very fast to smaller countries, and this is because it scales based on your size, your locations, your population count. So you need a certain percentage of spread through your locations and your population. And if you do not meet that, or if you have a higher amount of both, then it makes it harder to adopt the institution. It also makes it more expensive. So being a smaller nation, you pay less for institutions and it spreads a lot faster to you as well. Now, the other style is going to be a wide style. So that's going to be countries like France, Hungary, Bohemia, England, Castile. These countries will typically go and take over large areas. What they're going to focus on is turning those areas into vassals to get income from, and then later on integrate the territories in to create taxes from them or to take advantage of profitable RGOs to then trade away for profit. Another thing is that they will usually have a higher levy count. So for example, France, they're in the middle of a war right now, but they had starting out before the war about 130K. Go ahead, look at Bohemia with 5.5 million people. They have access to 91,000 troops, 65,000 of that being levies itself. And then look at this tiny country here. They're just, well, that's a bad example. Here, let's use Torino. This is one of my vassals. This small country right here only has access to 6K troops because they have less population. You get a percentage of your troops based on your population, or your levies as a percentage of your population. So the higher your population, the more levies you can get. Now, this can be affected, obviously, if you're playing tall. If you have a lot of money, you can just dump money into regulars. So you can recruit regulars, and as long as you can sustain regulars, then you can artificially inflate your troop count essentially. And regulars are a lot better than levies, so that's another thing. If you have a lot more regulars in the AI, you'll probably do all right because it's kind of a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio. Big wide economies as well will typically own multiple markets. So this is a bad example because I own the Barcelona market. I'm playing wide technically in this game. So I own Venice, Genova, Napoli, Ragusa. So you own multiple markets, right? And then what ends up happening is I can trade in between all of these markets, making a lot of money. So there's this thing that happens too, like where if you control these markets, you're making money between trading between your markets itself. So what that means is a big wide empire, your institution spread is just going to be drastically lower than a tall one. So you're going to struggle, I've noticed, especially like on Castile or sometimes France or England, just having issues with getting access to the institutions fast enough. You're going to see where you're going to have missing chunks like printing press, for example. It's all in Italy, but still France, Castile, Aragon, England, parts of it are missing. And so that really affects, how fast you can get access to technology, which helps propel your nation forward. Now, out of those now tall and wide economies, you will have different ways to make income. I will call those, I pretty much have two primary ways that I think in this game that you make the most money. That is going to be from taxes and from trade. So you can lean towards either or. It's really hard, I think, to do both. You can, but the things, the privileges and the laws and stuff that you need, you're sometimes limited because you have to take the one thing or the other. And so I've noticed you're either going to be buffing your tax side of your income or your trade side of your income, just depending, while making money through different other avenues such as diplomacy, minting, taking out loans, which is a very valid strategy, as well as utilizing your estates. So making your estates rich enough to be able to build buildings for you. So you can see right here, estate constructions. I generally have, in the early game, maybe 1 to 5. Late game, it can be anywhere between 10 to 20 buildings being built at once. And these estates are building useful things. Spinner's Guild, Mason, Protected Harbor, Sand Pit, Armory. I need these things. Now, sometimes they build things you don't like a spiritualist retreat or toll castles. What's another one that we don't like? I think those are the biggest ones, but they do also build buildings too that are specific to those estates that are really nice to have. Such as, here's one, local markets. It increases production efficiency in the entire town or location. Okay, it does give local burger power, but plus 10%. But that extra production efficiency that applies to everything is really, really nice. So see, it's going to be coming from this, and you're going to see local markets right here. So having your estates being able to build things is another hidden way to make some income on the side. It's not direct, and you can't control it, but it does help scale you and spend money that you may not have normally had access to before because of limits on how much you may be able to tax the estates, satisfaction, and all the stuff that holds you back. So we'll start with the first primary way to make money, which is going to be your taxes. So taxes are affected by multiple things. I'm going to actually give a brief little flash here for 10 seconds. And this is going to be the things that affect the taxes. And I'm going to go over them with you one by one. So we'll start with your tax base. Your tax base is going to be the total amount of ducats that is generated in every location, which comes from the total profit of the RGO in buildings multiplied by its control. So if my building makes 1 ducat and my control is 50%, it is 1 ducat times 50%, which is 0.5 tax base. Now, if your RGO in buildings and then your control all add up to a nice little sum, you can start getting a good tax base, as you see here, from different locations. Now, in those locations, you can only tax them based on the percentage that you're taxing those estates. So I'm only taxing the burghers at 25%, the commoners at 37%, the nobles are not getting taxed at all, and somehow, oh, no, I am taxing them a little bit. I'm taxing them 3%. So you can see there, I wasn't taxing them before. That's why I was like confused. So you can see, even though they have higher tax bases, I'm not getting access to those, but the higher that I increase the tax base for that estate, and if I can tax them higher, I may make more money. So you pretty much want to concentrate on burghers. That's kind of your bread and butter. These are your merchants. They have the most profitable buildings, and you can tax them and keep them happy as well. Now your tax efficiency, this is going to be how well you can actually multiply the taxes that you're getting out of your tax base. So tax efficiency essentially takes the percentage and increases how well you are. I don't know the exact like modifier, or if it's not directly like 1 times the efficiency. It's it's like an equation, and essentially though, if you increase efficiency, you make more money from your taxes. Make this number go up if you want this number to go up. Not tax base, actually. The taxes down here. If you want these to go up, increase your tax efficiency and tax base, and you'll get more taxes out of your estates. So one of the ways to maximize your taxes that you're going to be getting out of your estates is going to be through estate satisfaction and estate satisfaction equilibrium. So estate satisfaction is currently just how happy they are at the moment. This does affect all the population inside your locations. So if they are part of the commoners or the peasant estate and their satisfaction, overall satisfaction is 60%, that affects a location. So for example, here, you know, my location for the majority of my population in this location is 98% satisfaction, and that is just due to having high satisfaction in those estates. Meanwhile, in other estates, I do not have as high satisfaction, and then also due to the culture difference here, there's also a satisfaction debuff. Now, because I have low satisfaction, it is leading to lower control, which with lower control, we get lower taxes. So having higher satisfaction can lead to higher control within a location itself, meaning that you are going to get higher taxes out of that location. Now, what affects how much you can tax is the maximum tax itself, and then how happy they are, like their equilibrium, determines how much of that maximum tax you can actually use. So If their equilibrium right here, for example, is already at 50%, I can only tax them a certain amount because whenever I go to tax them, the equilibrium is affected by the taxes, and then all these other laws that I have in place are reducing the equilibrium to keep it at that point. Meanwhile, for the burgers, I have the opposite problem. I have such a high equilibrium, I can max the slider all the way up because they have all these laws buffing it, and I could probably tax it another 20%, but I can't because I just simply lack maximum tax. So we increase maximum tax in a couple different ways. It is just a base value of plus 30% for your estates, then it's modified basically with how much your maximum tax can be. In your estate power, your laws, your values, and privileges all affect that maximum tax that you're able to actually apply to them. So even if they're super happy, if your maximum tax is low, you're not actually going to be able to get the maximum amount of taxes out of that estate. The other thing to note is going to be your production efficiency. So increasing your production efficiency basically increases how much profit that you're going to make from your building, which directly increases how much taxes that you're getting. So essentially we're getting 20 profit from this building. That 20 profit is being directly added into this tax base. Now, production efficiency is basically what impacts the output of the building. So if this is a direct multiplier, so if you are producing 1, you then add whatever your production efficiency is, or you times it by your production efficiency and then add that number into your base of 1. So if you have a production efficiency of 44% and I'm going to produce 1 cloth, I would actually produce 1.44 cloth because of the production efficiency, which then means that I can sell that to the market for whatever the cost is and make more profit with the same amount of input. So I can use the same amount of input basically and get more output. So it is very, very important to increase the amount of taxes that you're getting in a location if you want to stack taxes somewhere. It's increasing production efficiency. The way you do that is going to be through different laws and stuff like that, but also through stacking different levels. So here, one of the biggest ways that I'm getting production efficiency is because I simply have 19 levels of the same building. Now I also have inside this, so this is a Spinners Guild inside this province of Venice. So it's inside the Venice province. Over here in this location, I have a wool RGO, which is producing wool locally in the province. This is then giving my Spinners Guild an extra 10% in production efficiency. This matters, okay? So between stacking it, having a local source of the resource in the province, and then also having capital economy, you're seeing me get a large amount of production efficiency primarily from those things. Capital economy is a value, so you start off traditionally with traditional economy in most countries. Now, as Venice and some of the merchant republics, you start off with capital economy, so it's really nice buff early game to where you can take advantage of it, and that is exactly what I did in this game. I kind of exploited in this gameplay the trade advantage of Venice and the merchant republics. Now, having high tax base is meaningless without high control. So as you can see, we'll go to my control map mode. In locations such as this over here, I only have 15 control. I am not getting any taxes out of this. The reason why I own these locations is for different reasons. It's mainly for a trade advantage inside the market itself, while the places that I have high control, this is where you're going to see a lot of my buildings. So almost all of my buildings, when I build anything, will be centered around my capital and will be around places that I have high control in. If I have higher control, that means I make higher taxes. So even in this location with 20,000 people, it's a small little town basically, I'm still getting 11 tax base out of it, which is getting me 2.5 ducats from there. Now, as opposed to, yeah, Ragusa with 42,000 population and low control, I am only getting about, I could get a total of 22 tax base, but my control is so low, I'm getting barely anything. So I'm only making 1.3 ducats from this location. Meanwhile, over here, I'm actually making more money from a smaller location with less buildings. So that's the idea behind control. You definitely want to build all your buildings around the areas that you have high control. So that's typically going to be your capital until the later game, and you get ways to reduce control and proximity through naval ways or through roads. There's a couple different ways. We'll go over that at the end of the video. So your next big income source is going to definitely be trade. So trade is affected by a few different things. That is going to be your trade efficiency, um, and production efficiency, a few different things. We're actually going to go ahead and flash the same thing that I did for the tax-based income. I'm going to flash the stuff here that affects the trade-based income, and we're going to go ahead and start with trade efficiency. Very much like production efficiency or tax efficiency, it basically increases the amount of profit that you're able to make on a trade, or on income on trade itself. So what it does is that it basically increases the price of an item in markets and makes the price better, so you make more profit. Okay, so you want to get trade efficiency. It is very hard to stack. As you can see, I am almost 200 years in, and I only had, by age 2, I think it was like, we just got, like an extra 5% trade efficiency in the last like 30 years. So for a while, you're less than 10%. And there's not many ways to increase this farther than where it's at right now. Production efficiency, obviously we went over that. That does play into how many goods you can actually trade. So you do want to be able to produce goods, and typically you want to make a lot of something. So in my market in Venice, for example, I think one of the biggest trades I have right now, or that we produce a lot of, is going to be jewelry. So we have a lot of jewelry production inside around my capital, and then I trade that away and I sell it to a lot of other markets. So I'm making money on the production itself, so it's adding to my tax base. And as you can see right here, even though we have a demand, we're going to highlight this demand so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Look at that. So almost 100 demand, and all of it is just exports. It's just me selling my jewelry elsewhere. So I'm making money off of these trades, a large amount of it, while also making money on the production. So for example, Ferrara, I'm not going to try and pronounce these cities, but this is adding tax base to this city. So this is then increasing my taxes that I'm making. So I'm making taxes off my production, then I'm making money off the trade itself. So you will almost always double dip, but it is really hard to make money on trade early on unless you are playing a merchant republic, or if you don't have a large amount of trade capacity. So, and honestly, you need to be a merchant republic to make it worth it early on, or you need to be able to figure out a way to lower your trade maintenance. So trade maintenance is really is what affects profitability the most of a trade. So let's go to a trade and we will highlight it. And right here, I am paying 10.87 ducats, and I'm actually paying 45% less, so I really would be paying 15 or so, I think is what that math is, if I'm not mistaken, roughly around that. I'd be paying about 15 ducats, which would then subtract another 4 ducats from this trade profit, meaning I would make only 15 in from my trade. That's a 20% hit. That's a pretty decent hit in the trade profit itself because my trade maintenance has been reduced by 45%. It is basically allowing me to have less cost to how much it takes to make the trade itself. You know, trade route maintenance is basically simulating the idea of packing up a ship and paying a merchant to move the goods from one location to another. You will have things such as sound tolls as well, and this is another way you can make money. This is what I do in Constantinople. I actually make money from sound tolls. Let's see, will it show me? Here we go. So basically, all these trades are going through Constantinople, and I am getting a small, like, toll off of each one of these things. So I think it adds up to a decent amount. It's almost like 20 ducats just from this toll. There's this one, they look like this on the map when you're looking in the market mode. Like it's usually at straights, and if you highlight them, the sound toll, it'll tell you where they are at. So there's only a couple, and here's another one up in the Denmark, Sweden area. It's this straight right here. So the controller of that location then basically makes money on all the trades passing through it. So if you are, so trade maintenance and sound tolls can then affect how profitable the trade is and makes it whether or not it's even worth it. So I went ahead and wanted to take advantage. I didn't want to pay the tolls, so I took Constantinople. So now I make money on the tolls instead of paying the toll, right? So do everything you can to reduce the cost of the trade itself, and that is by trade maintenance and not paying tolls. You then do have trade advantage, which determines whether or not you will have first dibs on something. So basically, trade advantage is what determines whether or not, like, if I want to import, say, pepper from somewhere or gold from Pest. So Hungary is exporting a ton of gold, right? So they're exporting all this gold and silver. If I went into Hungary and I decided I wanted to try and trade from Pest to Venice, that gold that he's trading to me right now, because his trade advantage is higher than me, he would get first dibs. So if he's already making that trade, if he's already making this trade of trading all this gold away, I can't go and take over that trade because his trade advantage is higher than mine's. Now, something fun you can do in like trade based economies is you can start to climb in trade advantage. So for example, I've built a bunch of trade offices inside London in the London market. My trade advantage has actually started to climb as my maritime presence increases it, as well as my buildings have increased it by 15. And I can do other things as well to increase this. And then eventually what happens is I can take over all the profitable trades in London if I want to. If there's other profitable trades, like for example, here's some right here, the London to Edinburgh trade for saffron, I would be able to take those over. But because London, for example, isn't trading pearls, I'm able to actually take pearls away from the London market and export it to Paris, for example. Now that trade advantage is what determines who gets to do that first, basically. Who gets to make the trade first. So increasing your trade advantage, that's important. I think if you don't have high advantage, you're not going to be able to get access to the goods to begin with. Now your trade capacity is how many trades you can actually make itself. So if I have 100 trade capacity, I'm spending 1 point of trade capacity or zero point 0.1 or 0.05 trade capacity to make these trades. So right here, for example, I am spending 1 trade capacity to export from Venice to Ragusa 1.63 pepper. And so this is important because the more trade capacity you have, the more money or more trades you can make, which means the more money you can make. Now, ooh, I gotta get rid of these. These are not, Yeah, see, I got to get rid of that. Those are unprofitable. So great example of trade advantage actually is I have been trying to trade iron from this market, and I've had trade capacity assigned to it, and I've been getting absolutely nothing because essentially there is, yeah, so I just don't have access to it before Pest does. And then, because they're actually using it all. So here you go. Here's trade advantage. So it tells you right here, Poland, Hungary, and the other countries have access to this iron before I do because I lack the trade advantage to make the trade itself. So trade capacity, trade advantage, very, very important to determine whether or not you're actually going to be able to trade the good or if you're going to be able to get access to goods itself. And your last thing is going to be trade range. This is really important too because this determines whether or not you can skip markets. If I'm over in London, I cannot trade depending on my range. Like, so for example here, well, my trade range is pretty high, so it's showing you that. Let me see. Let's go to someone else with a lower trade range. Let's see. Yeah, massive difference. So they have 1,000 trade range, and we have about double that on Venice, and they can't trade to a lot of these surrounding markets. So Venice is able to trade all of the goods in these other markets or import or export. So Venice can send goods to Kyiv, for example. Meanwhile, this country can't, even though it's in the Genoa's market, it just lacks the trade range itself. So without the trade range, you're not able to send the goods or get the goods from other markets that are farther away. Now, the other types of income that you will have, those will be that are worth mentioning at least. That's going to be diplomatic income, and now this is primarily going to come from vassals. So you can see here that I vassalized a lot of the Byzantines and the Greeks over here, and actually Tunis down here as well. And Tunis, this 5 location, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 locations is giving me a vassal income of 25, yeah, 26, 23 gold. Pavia, this other vassal over here. Now this is a pretty large vassal. I would not recommend making vassals large. I actually made this mistake. I should have cut this in half. They have a very high population count. You kind of want to keep vassals weak in comparison to you. You don't want to make each one an individual vassal like very, very significantly powerful. But basically, I'm getting a large amount of money from vassals, and you can also get this through war reparations as well as selling military access, I've noticed. That scales up later game, but typically if you are controlling like areas between countries and they are going to war, a lot of countries will ask to buy military access from you, which is a nice boost to income. But diplomacy is mainly going to come from the vassal when it comes to the diplomatic income. The other thing is going to be minting. So minting income is affected by a few different things. If you mint too much, you then create inflation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Things will get more expensive, but say you want to create a large stockpile of money, you can go ahead and mint a large amount of money, and then you can go negative inflation and still be positive income, and then be able to spend all that money on whatever you may need to in that moment. It's a good way for slingshotting, I think, meaning like if you need to get access to a bunch of buildings and you don't have anything being built at all, and you need to build something and you don't have any money, go ahead, print some money, let your inflation go up for a year or two. It's no big deal. It'll go up maybe to a few percent, and then just go negative and then leave it there for a while. Just don't forget to bring it back up. Now you can mint more if your minting threshold is higher, and you can increase that through different, let's see here, different ways. It's not going to show me, but a good example, let me show you. Minting threshold, so age 2, you'll get it for banking. It is going to increase basically the amount that you can mint before you get inflation. So the higher your threshold, the more money you can print, basically. Definitely use this. Now, the other thing too is you're going to have a silver or gold access. You're either going to need to produce it locally yourself, or you're going to need to be able to trade it into your market. If you're unable to, what ends up happening is you get lower minting efficiency. So until you get access to the amount of silver that you need, you will not, silver or gold, you won't be able to mint the amount of money that you're trying to make. So for example, right here, it's telling me the demand for the Venice market is adding this. So 4 gold, 4 silver. If I wasn't able to access that, then I would have a reduction in my efficiency for minting, which I might produce like half as much gold instead. The other thing I take advantage of, if you get rich estates, you can take out loans and you can use that to strategically increase your income as well. So if you know that you can build around buildings that once built will start getting like say you have population burgers in a city that can right away get put into a burger building and start producing, but you just don't have the money, go ahead, take out a few loans. You can see here that I have debt already, and to be honest, I do this all the time. Anytime I need a couple extra, some extra ducats, I'll hit that loan button 2 or 3 times. Now, the only way you go bankrupt is when you are unable to borrow money from a bank or from your estates. So just make sure that your estates have money. So that leads me into having estates make income. So basically, make sure that the price of goods are so cheap that their expenses they're not having to spend too much money on these things. And if the price of the good is lower, they'll actually buy more, which means that you'll still make good money. There'll still be demand, which will keep the price of the thing good in your actual like production building itself. So don't worry about like making a bunch of something. Go ahead and make a bunch of something. Now there's a few things that you don't want to make a lot of. If it's not stuff that is in demand by an estate, don't really focus on it. Let's see here. Let's there. Boop. Expenses. So for example, commoners spend a lot of money on furniture and food. They also have a demand for weaponry because I added that privilege. So for example, I gave commoners access to weaponry, while before they wouldn't have this normally, which is then adding demand to the market, which means they're buying it. So I'm making money from that. The burgers will then buy different things. So their estate's expenses here are 580. So for example, they're spending 580 while commoners are only spending 197. That's why having burgers is a lot more important. Nobles will also spend a lot as well, and so will your clerics. Basically, your higher classes spend a lot more. They want things such as fine cloth, books, stuff like that. You can get an idea here of what they're purchasing. So lowering the cost of these things that you see on my screen right now makes it to where they have higher income after their expenses. If you're taxing them lower as well, this gives them a higher income too. If they are able to make trades or profitable trades because goods are cheaper in your markets, then they're able to do that too. So having estates make money is not necessarily a bad thing. You just kind of want to balance that out against their power because you don't want an estate to get too powerful in comparison to the crown. So expenses, this is really important to balance out. You can actually see here, whew, I'm spending a lot on things. The expenses do scale off your total economic base. Your economic base is going to be, hold on one second. So your economic base is your tax base plus the volume of trades in sound tolls. So it's pretty much the entirety of the income that your uh, nation makes potentially. So it's your tax base. So it's a percentage of that. So if your tax base is really, really high, you will have high expenses. So having high tax base, but then not being able to tax your people can lead to like a lopsided economy where your expenses are a lot higher than your income because your thresholds on your taxes are just not there whatsoever or on trade. So you need to make sure that you're able to lower the things that we talked about to increase money or income, that you affect those things on the tax or trade based side of things, because no matter what, as you build things, tax base increases and you start in trade income increases. So you can't have that. You need that to scale harder than your total percentage that you're going to have here. Um, so with cost of court, like the most expensive things that you're going to have, honestly, I'm going to go just top. I'm going to do them in a top to bottom way. Cost of court is going to be your highest thing. Buildings. Actually, the exact way that this is structured right now gives you the perfect example. Your cost of court, your buildings, your diplo spending, and then your maintenance for your military, and then stability. That's typically how in order you're going to be what's going to be the most expensive. So cost of court gets really expensive because it scales off of how powerful you get. So in the late game, if you become a hegemon or a great power, this is going to increase drastically so. The base cost of every expense is 10%. So the only thing that's really increasing here for me is the actual cost of court. So like Diplo spending is 10%. Stability is 10%. And then I actually have a modifier that is lowering it right here. So I have a modifier that's actually lowering my stability cost. So here, that's right there. So different things can then affect those expenses. And cost of court, you really want to spend and maximize on, especially early game. Like you want to have 100 Republican tradition, 100 legitimacy, whatever it is that if you're monarchy or a republic, you want to make sure that this is 100 because this gives you crown power. And crown power gives you higher trade income and then lowers the cost of court and lowers your building upkeep costs, which then means that all your expenses get lower and then your income gets higher. So you definitely want, there's a real return right here. You don't want to just put this here and spend the money. You just want to max it out, because what ends up happening once it hits 100, it then goes into like a maintenance phase, whatever maintenance cost, whatever that is. So it'd be like right around here for me. It would automatically tick down. So you want to definitely max this out. I always keep this up. When it comes to buildings, so buildings, the most expensive things that you will spend are armories, marketplaces, universities, and libraries. They will get expensive. They have the highest base cost, and then they also require multiple goods or inputs that go into them that also have high base costs. So what you can do in order to lower the cost of these things is to lower the cost of the inputs. So for example, I need in the armories in Venice, they need access to 4 firearms, which usually cost 3 each. But as you can see, I've lowered the cost of firearms to be to where they're actually only spending 8.7 ducats on firearms instead of 12. So inside my market, I believe that firearms have been successfully reduced from 3 ducats to 2.2 or 2.12 ducats. So they're 29% cheaper. So that means that ultimately my maintenance is 29% cheaper on top of whatever my estate, my crown power is. So you need to make sure that the inputs that go into the building maintenance or the buildings that you're making are low as well. So if you're making a library or if you're playing a smaller country, and you're playing with less income, right? building too many of something and then not having income. Like if you build too many libraries, for example, but you don't have the income to sustain it, you may need to figure out how to lower the cost of the library or reduce the amount of libraries that you actually have. So building maintenance, I mean, I love this part of the game honestly because this is what makes it dynamic to me, is that I can look at this and go, okay, so I need to figure out how to lower the cost of firearms, leather, cloth, paper, and weaponry. And then I need to look into the inputs of all of those things to also then lower the cost of those so that it ultimately makes it cheaper. You see what I'm saying? So it's a giant chain, and this is where you start to see how I can lower my expenses. If you lower the cost of the things that go into everything, that starts to make things cheaper while then also making you income because that's what you're making. You start producing things which makes you more taxes, or and then the excess stuff you then get to trade away. So for example, jewelry in my case with this Venice run that I have. Now, military maintenance like Army maintenance, Navy, and fort maintenance, again, directly affected by all the goods that go into them. So if something has the base cost of something like men at arms, they cost a base cost of 1 that is then modified. So it's modified by the fact that I'm not spending all of my army maintenance totally, but then, so here, for example, so a men-at-arm, traditionally its base ducat cost is 1, but you can see that for 80 men-at-arms, I'm actually only paying about 50 ducats. So it's being reduced by about 30% because all the goods that are being maintained by men-at-arms, which is weaponry and leather, I have reduced the price of by 30%. So Army maintenance, Navy maintenance, fort maintenance, you want to make that cheaper, make the goods that go into the maintenance of these things cheaper. Castles use tar, weaponry, tools, stone, for example. So make those cheaper, your maintenance goes down. Navy, I've tend to see is actually like one of the cheapest things to maintain. I have 90, 100, 110 ships right here, and I'm only spending 40 ducats. um, that's it's and it's always at full. I've never had to go, let me put this down. So that's something to keep in mind. Navy maintenance is probably the cheapest out of the military maintenances. Diplo spending, so depending on whether or not you are playing with vassals, you will need to spend on Diplo. If you play tall, for example, and you're playing no vassals, you won't need to do this. But see here, if I have it all the way up, I currently still have disloyal vassals, and this is for another reason. This is because I made too many powerful vassals. But if I don't spend anything, like just say I spend half, I then create actually a disloyal subject, or more disloyal subjects, and almost all of them go disloyal. Look at that. 10, 20, 30%, like almost all of my vassals hate me. So I have to keep this maxed always, and so you can see I'm spending a large amount of money on this. And I've played the whole game with this maxed because I've had vassals since the first 10, 15 years. So that is one thing that I noticed, like if you're playing vassals, you're going to spend a lot of your money on cost to court and your Diplo spending. Stability is up to you how much you want to spend. I think that I'm comfortable between 30 and 50 stability. After that, I don't really see a real benefit. At 100 stability, you have higher estate satisfaction equilibrium, which means you can tax people higher, which is nice, but the amount that I have to spend basically to get there is a lot less or a lot more than for like tradition or legitimacy. So, and you tend to have more stability hits for things, meaning that you'll get events that are like -7 stability if you don't pass um, your parliament, you'll get -7 stability. So I think it's like and it scales, so I get less stability the higher that you get to. So even though right now I'm getting 0.56 stability, at like 50 stability, I might only get 0.3. So then I'm spending the same amount of money on the stability while making even less stability. So that is that's a personal opinion. I think keeping it at like zero point 0.2 is where I justify. Just that's kind of that's the nice Goldilocks zone I found. I don't ever have low stability, but I don't ever have like I don't really get above 40 or 50 stability. So if you're trying to remove an estate privilege, you may have to pump this and spend more and just eat the cost. Because in order to like remove an estate privilege, you have to spend stability, and you may not want to go negative. So yeah. And then what else? I think the other thing we have is going to be interest. So yeah, interest can be lowered as well within reforms and privileges and values. Um, there is, what is it? Bank interest. Yeah, so bank interest, banking when you get to age two, I think the first research you do is minus 2% bank interest. So that's why I'm saying like taking out loans is an actual valid strategy because you're going to get things that reduce the amount of interest instead of it being 10% interest. It's like 5, 4, 3% later on. So, and you'll scale that loan based on how rich you get. So, early on I was only able to take out loans of 100. Now I can take out loans of 1,000 because my estates are so rich and it's scaled with my economy. So that gives me access to be able to slingshot even further. And then honorable mentions will definitely be your exploration in colonies. As you get into the mid game, you'll start to see that as you establish more and more colonies, the number of colonies that you make will make this more expensive. So you just want to keep that in mind if you're throwing down 5, 6, 7 colonies and all of a sudden you're like, wait, what happened? How did my expenses shoot up? It may be because of that. Same thing with exploration. Yeah, so exploration amount is a base amount of 10 that is then reduced by certain values, texts, and stuff like that. A lot of it is going to be technology that I've noticed that reduces the exploration costs. Food as well is a good mention. So for example, Byzantium here is spending a lot of ducats on food. So I'm spending pretty much 10 ducats in Byzantium because they do not have access to good food production in this province itself. So let's say, yeah, the provincial food here, the food price here is 0.004. Normally it is 0.01, not 0.04, and that is because in this entire market, the food production in Constantinople is pretty bad. So the stockpile here you can see is actually pretty low. And then in comparison to Venice, where the stockpile here is full, the food price is 0.01. And that is because there is a large surplus, and you can see we're barely importing food. So you just want to make sure the cost of food is low by producing a lot of food and making sure the stockpile is full. If the stockpile isn't full, it leads to a higher food price as opposed to, like, for example, here in Venice or any of the other countries, because they have a full stockpile, they are actually able to sell the food. Anything with a lower stockpile, food becomes way more expensive, like for example in the Foss market here. So that pretty much gives me your deep dive onto the two primary ways of income and then balancing the expenses, kind of giving you some tips and tricks to how to do that. I am going to go over the actual values reforms really quickly, laws, privileges that affect all of these stats that we just talked about. So if you skipped ahead to just see what I can do to maximize these things because you already knew what they were, this is the section for you. So we're going to jump into values. I'm going to go ahead and flash it on the screen and we'll just go over this. Decentralization is going to give you a state satisfaction of equilibrium of plus 2.5%. You will almost always push to decentralization when you have vassals. Centralization, though, gives you 50% crown power or minus 10% proximity cost. So you have to keep in mind, just depending on how you're playing, you may switch to either or. Another one is traditionalist. Traditionalist here as well gives you a state satisfaction as well by plus 2.5%. And this is based, now just so you guys know, it's a sliding amount. So right now, for example, with decentralization, I'm only getting 1.81 satisfaction equilibrium instead of the full 5% because of where I'm at on the scale of the value itself. Okay, so it can go up to these amounts. Another one is going to be land. Land is going to lower the proximity cost by minus 10%, which then means that you get more taxes. Okay, lower proximity, higher control means that you get higher taxes out of a place. Now, naval will lower the proximity through the sea, through maritime presence. So if you're playing like an island nation, as you can see, I'm going mainly naval. I'm going to own a lot of land that has a lot of coastline. That's all I'm going to own. I'm not going to go into Hungary or Bohemia. If I was playing as France or Bohemia or Hungary, for example, I would have a land value because it would increase my proximity or decrease my proximity and my trade range as well. Another good one is going to be plutocracy. So this is going to increase your trade efficiency by plus 2.5% while also lowering the expected cost of court by minus 2%. So it's going to save you on expenses and make you more money on trade. Now on the flip side, you're going to have aristocracy, which is going to increase your cost of court. So keep that in mind depending on what value you're looking at. Oh, serfdom. Okay, so serfdom is interesting because if you are playing a mainly peasant-based economy, I can see a reason for pushing for this. I would see it more of an early game thing. I would not see it as a mid to late game. You probably are going to transition from serfdom to free subjects. The reason why is just because free subjects is going to reduce food consumption while also increasing pop promotion speed and monthly prosperity, which just has monthly prosperity is a pretty big modifier. It basically increases development, and then development increases everything else. So you do want prosperity and you do want promotion speed because what ends up happening is you're going to promote peasants into laborers, into burghers, into clergy and the other estates. So serfdom early on, where you're getting the maximum tax from the peasant estates by plus 20% and the extra raw materials before you transition into a modernish economy. That is definitely something I could see a play for. Quality is a good one. This decreases or quality increases your army maintenance, but it does do some other good stuff for your military. I prefer quality, I'm not gonna lie. Quantity will decrease army maintenance. It does increase your possible frontage. The only thing I don't like is the army initiative. I have to test this more, but essentially initiative is who gets to fight first and who does damage first. So having higher initiative I found is better. So I try to stay away from this. But if for some reason it works out or gets changed at a different time, I can see quantity being definitely worth it because that minus 10% to army maintenance is pretty big. What else? We have capital economy. This is going to be probably your bread and butter here. You want to get capital economy probably as soon as possible. What it does is it increases production efficiency by up to plus 20% while reducing building costs by minus 10% and bank interest by minus 3%. So you get access to those juicy, juicy loans. This is pretty large to have. I can't express how important production efficiency is. That is what is going to make you profitable in the long run. So traditional economy, you will have higher food and raw material output, but you just will make more money off of the finished goods, jewelry, for example, fine cloth, regular cloth, not the raw material itself. The raw material is what you take and turn into a finished product, and then that is what you take and sell, and having higher production efficiency makes that more profitable. There are going to be a few other things that you get through the ages. What I just went over is what is available at the beginning of the game. Real quickly, I will go over the next like 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's 5. Inward will grant control of up to 0.5% and plus 25% crown power. Liberalism will give plus 5% estate satisfaction equilibrium. Absolutionism will give plus 100% crown power while reducing satisfaction equilibrium by minus 5%. Mercantilism, oh boy, minus 10% trade maintenance. I like that one, but it gives you a minus 1% trade efficiency, while free trade gives you plus 20% trade advantage and plus 1% trade efficiency. Those are the values that can affect your incomes, all the stuff and stats that affect your income. We're going to go ahead, we'll jump into reforms. So reforms, I'm not going to go over all of them because there are a lot of them. I will mention the ones that I'm playing with, for example, right now, Trade Office Network. It gives me extra trade range. It also reduces my foreign building cost, which is really important when you are going a trade-based run, because essentially what I do is I build trade offices inside other countries. So I have so many trade offices everywhere. It is ridiculous. All these little places I can build them in, and effectively it only costs me 4 ducats to build a trade office because I have reduced my building cost for foreign building by like minus 75%. So instead of me having to spend the base cost of 50. So pretty nice when you take that into account. For example, another one is bank ledger system. So that's going to reduce. This is an absolute must if you are doing trade. You have to get this. It reduces your trade maintenance by minus 20%. It is probably the single most largest way to reduce your trade maintenance in one go. Besides getting to, I think, let's see here, besides being a merchant republic. As you can see, I am 200 years in, and I have the only 2 ways that I have found to reduce my maintenance has been through Parliament for a year, not even a year, for 180 days. It reduces it by 25%, and then these 2 things right here. Later on, you will have access to, like, I think it's the Age of Reformation. So age 4 is when generally it opens up to get another minus 50, minus 70%, I think, for trade maintenance. So you can have a total of up to like 100, 130%. So merchant republics will have this, which is not a lot of merchant republics. Most are monarchies. And then you will also have to have the bank ledger system, which requires you to be 50 capital economy. So that's your value. So your capital economy has to be at 50, which most people start at traditional economy because I'm playing Venice, and I think most merchant republics or Italian states start with capital economy already there. So that means that right away, year 1, I can take bank ledger system, giving me that extra little minus 20% trade maintenance, and it helps a lot, let me tell you. And this is trade. This is what I'm talking about with Merchant Republic. Merchant Republic increases trade income by plus 25%, reduces the trade maintenance, reduces foreign building costs by minus 50%, and increases my trade capacity as well by plus 50%. So if you're doing trade, you go Merchant Republic and bank ledgers. It's just a no-brainer. Couple other reforms we'll go over. Let me see here if I have access to them to show you. If I don't, what I'm going to do is flash a list right here. Here we go for 10 seconds. If I don't have them on my screen, here's a couple here. Sortition, plus 5% tax efficiency. That is a good one if you're going tax-based economy. Formalized scales, weights, and measures. It gives you another plus 10% of tax efficiency while also reducing the estate enrichment, which estate enrichment is basically how much a tax or an estate can withhold from their taxes to you. So this is not necessarily the maximum tax. It is a little different, but basically you get more money when the enrichment is less. So that's a good one. And then pretty much anything that's going to give you crown power or like increase any of those stats. Now, certain nations have specific um, reforms to them, such as the Council of 10 or the Council of 40 for Venice, that give maybe extra modifiers that I can't really, and that's why I can't shout them all out because there's just so many. And you may play Hungary, Bohemia, or Denmark and have access to a different reform that I just don't have. So those are the generic ones that pretty much anyone can use when it comes to reforms that I really like. I think another good one too that I saw, hold on. Yeah, here's the ones that I can't take. Harbor administration, proximity court through port minus 5%. I would need to have at least 50 towards naval. I'm getting there. It's just taking a while. There's a couple others, universal serfdom. So if you did have that, if you started with that serfdom start, I could definitely see you pairing this with the value as well, and you would just have a nice little income from taxes. Like honestly, you would make a lot from peasants. Um, and I think that those are probably going to be your biggest shout outs right there. Yeah, so those are your biggest shout outs when it comes to reforms, okay? When it comes to privileges, so you do want to use privileges strategically. You do not want to give too many privileges. As you can see here, my burghers, I, I have not given a single privilege to the burghers. We started like this, okay? But that means that they've had high estate power this whole game. And it all comes from the privileges and sometimes a couple laws that might be in place, but mainly from privileges as well as your trade income versus tax base with the burghers. Same thing, right? So different laws. Another thing too is if you put their estates in power in parliament or as a general or admiral, it does increase their power as well slightly. So you typically want to place your estates, as you can see, like here's my kids and then my actual ruler. They are all in command and in cabinet, which is increasing my overall power itself. So, the privileges that you want to give, though, that might be worth it are, such things as land rights, that's plus 5% tax efficiency. That's for the nobles. They don't have much else that's like too good. I do like, I'll shout this out for clergy, possible clerics in towns and cities, plus 100. You want to go ahead and add this just because it gives them low power, but it adds 100 clerics to that city and town, which means that those clerics will have that demand. So, right now we have 100,000 clerics, which are then creating demand for certain things. So, they're spending money on books, wine, and fine cloth. Like, ooh, they gotta have their wine for communion. Okay, like you want more clerics. So if there's things that can add more clerics or the higher classes, such as the burghers especially, or clerics, you want to do it. The nobles you just don't want to have a lot of because they pretty much don't have a ton of things that are good for you, and a lot of it is bad. Now, the burghers, on the other hand, they're kind of the opposite of the nobles. They will have a lot of privileges that are good. Now, the only thing is if you give more power to them, it means you have less power yourself. So it's kind of like a balance that you're trying to find. I've been slowly taking away power from them. They used to be at like 60%, I think, when I started. So, and then because my republic power has grown, it's taken power from them. So that's been something that I've been trying to do, but they have some good privileges here. So let's see right here. So Commercial Advisory Council plus 10% trade capacity. You're going to have, I think, Land of Commerce, which gives an extra 2.5% efficiency. This is huge. Maritime presence. This is nice when you're a naval-based nation. You want to have this. You want to have maritime presence to increase control and proximity. This will grant you some prosperity. Prosperity is good. There's a couple others that I haven't wanted to grant them because I didn't want to increase their power because they're already so powerful. But something that might be nice is like building road rights. This allows the burghers, like I said, if you make them rich, now they're going to start building roads all over my nation for me automatically. Control over the coinage. This gives a lot of power, but in return you get extra gold and silver output as well as a higher minting threshold. This is a really powerful privilege. It's almost worth it for me to give them this privilege even now, just because I control provinces that have gold and silver, and then it allows me to mint more money. So I'd make more money from taxes as well as the actual minting itself. Another one, elite patronage. This gives extra trade efficiency at the cost of lowering the noble satisfaction equilibrium. It also does give you bonus towards plutocracy, and this is another thing to note, that a lot of these values and privileges and things like that, or a lot of these privileges, laws, and reforms will sometimes grant uh, impacts to the societal values that you're trying to go towards. So if you're trying to get towards capital economy, it may be worth it, for example, to go ahead and put something like guild investments down and just go ahead and give them the plus 50% power because you want to get capital economy and innovative as soon as possible. So, and then last one I'll mention right here is going to be treasury rights for the burghers. This one is an interesting one. You get a maximum tax threshold of minus 5%, but it increases your tax efficiency by plus 10%. You would think that you would then ultimately make less money maybe because of, you're getting less taxes from these guys, but it means that the taxes from the overall, like from the burghers itself, are actually more efficient as well as from the peasants. So I find that taking that privilege is actually almost always worth it. I very, very rarely, I don't think I've ever ran into a situation where it hasn't been worth it income-wise to take this. Urban development grants too. This is nice because it gives a base monthly development bonus to every location. So taking this early on is honestly really, really nice too. And again, in this game, I've been trying to weaken the burghers. So you see them, if you see me with some privileges that I'm saying you should definitely take these and I haven't, it's maybe a different reason. But in general, these are things that are good. One other one that I like to mention here is going to be there is a couple peasant ones that I like to add. It is going to be common militias. What this does is it gives peasants allowed weapons. I think we talked about this, but basically this is what creates the demand for weapons in my market by peasants. So peasants are spending money on weapons in different markets because of this privilege itself. If not, I would be making less money from like taxes, for example, or on the production of those weapons. So that's going to be your privileges for the estates. Let's go ahead. I think the last thing to cover is just going to be laws. So I'll do the same thing. I'm going to flash the laws on the screen that I'm going to shout out and like to list. We're going to start with the estate laws. So that's going to be distribution of power. Distribution of power, distribution of power gives you an extra 20% crown power and extra maximum tax. Oh my God, this is the first thing I do. If you, the first parliament, the first or second parliament, you force this law through, you want this right away. There's no reason not to have it right away. It's huge. It gives you a huge income boost, okay? Because higher crown power means higher trade income, higher taxes means higher ducats, okay? Kind of a no-brainer here. The other one you're going to get that I like is rights of the burghers. Now, you can curtail the rights and get a different You can get like strong guilds while giving them less power but higher production efficiency. You can curtail them, which means that you will get actually a higher maximum tax from them at the reduction of their equilibrium, which is not bad as well. I have them at strengthen because I am trying to get that sweet, sweet trade efficiency. I'm kind of experimenting and trying to see which one works best and at what point in the game works best. So kind of play around. There is no right one of these, but definitely rights of the burghers. You have a few different laws you can choose from that'll affect your economy in a nice way. The other thing too is going to be your distribution for metal. So precious metal distribution. If you have and own a location that produces silver or gold, such as this one right here, you can then get access to this law. Now, I have it on regulated export for higher trade efficiency. You can do unlimited export or export ban. I think export ban is going to be only good in very, very like unique situations. It just depends. You can try, change between the two, save a game and experiment. I think it just depends on your locations and economy itself. And then the other one too I like to shout out is going to be your education. So education of the masses. This is going to affect different estate satisfactions, but really what's important is making sure my people are, a lot of the times religious teachings is a pretty good one to get. And then as you go away from having peasants going towards something that increases the literacy for burghers, clergy, nobles, as you have more burghers, that might be better. I have it on the apprenticeships for the extra trade advantage. I don't really mind my peasants not having that extra plus 5% literacy. And I actually have a pretty high average literacy in general with this at right now at 25, which is fairly high, I think, in comparison. Yeah. Yeah, so this is all this area is me with some of that red also being me. But as you can see in Venice, 35, 33, 36, 37 is the average literacy, like in even like my core areas. It's maritime law. So that's the last one. And I have this on protect trade routes, which gives me extra satisfaction equilibrium and trade range. That's pretty much the best one, I think, for this law itself. I could see an argument for the capital economy or naval one. This just pushes you towards those values, which getting capital economy push and naval push is really hard. So you could look at these two things too when you're looking at trying to push those values to get the other benefits associated with them. But that concludes all the laws that are available that I would recommend. You can kind of look in more, look to see if there might, you get access to sometimes other things, but those are primarily like your first 200, 300 years, what you're going to see and what you need to probably change or mess with. Thank you guys for watching. If you made it all the way to the end here, I will leave you with one fun history fact. If you make it to this point and you get to this moment, please respond in the comments with another fun history fact as well to share with us. But this fun history fact that I have for you is Napoleon in 1812 took 187,600 horses with his army and rode into Russia, and only 1,600 horses came back. So remember, don't invade in winter, even in EU5. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel, guys. Appreciate y'all. Have a blessed day.